Welcome back to Tarik Talk. Let's get into today's episode. TEFAF New York returns to the historic Park Avenue Armory from May 15th through May 19th, 2026, bringing together some of the world's most prestigious galleries, collectors, curators, museums, and cultural institutions for what continues to be one of the most sophisticated and influential art fairs in the international art market. Now, when people talk about TEFAF, they're talking about a fair that occupies a very different category compared to many other contemporary art fairs happening throughout New York. TEFAF stands for the European Fine Art Foundation, and the organization originally began in Maastricht in the Netherlands, where its flagship fair has become legendary for museum-quality presentations spanning centuries of art history. And unlike fairs focused exclusively on contemporary art, TEFAF moves across time itself. At TEFAF, you can walk from a booth presenting a Renaissance painting into a gallery specializing in contemporary sculpture, then into rooms filled with rare antiquities, jewelry, photography, manuscripts, modern design, Asian art, old masters, and 20th century masterpieces. That breadth is one of the things that makes TEFAF so unique. It's less about trends and more about art history as a living continuum. And the New York edition has become an essential extension of that identity. For 2026, TEFAF New York features approximately 90 exhibitors from around the world, representing galleries from Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and North America. TEFAF.com. The fair once again takes place inside the iconic Park Avenue Armory on Manhattan's Upper East Side, one of the most architecturally dramatic venues in New York City. And honestly, the venue itself changes the entire atmosphere of the fair. The Armory's historic interiors, soaring ceilings, period rooms, and monumental architecture create an experience that feels almost museum-like. Unlike convention center-style fairs, TEFAF New York feels intimate, elegant, and immersive. Each gallery presentation is carefully staged almost like a temporary exhibition. Lighting matters. Furniture matters. Architecture matters. Every detail contributes to the atmosphere. And because the fair spans multiple centuries of artistic production, walking through TEFAF feels less like navigating a commercial fair and more like traveling through different moments in art history simultaneously. One of the major highlights this year is the continued expansion of contemporary art presentations within the fair. While TEFAF has historically been associated strongly with old masters and historical works, the New York edition increasingly embraces dialogues between historical and contemporary practices. ApolloMagazine.com. Several galleries this year are presenting contemporary artists alongside historical material, creating conversations across generations, cultures, and mediums. And honestly, that curatorial approach feels incredibly relevant right now. The art world today is increasingly interested in connections between past and present rather than rigid categories separating them. At TEFAF, those boundaries dissolve. A contemporary sculpture might appear beside a 17th century painting, modern design beside classical antiquities, photography beside ancient objects. The fair encourages viewers to think about continuity, influence, memory, and material history across time. Another major talking point this year is the exceptional level of museum-quality works being brought to New York. TEFAF has built its reputation around rigorous vetting standards, with committees of scholars, conservators, and specialists examining works before they appear at the fair. TEFAF.com. That vetting process has become one of the defining aspects of the fair itself. Collectors and institutions trust TEFAF because of its emphasis on scholarship, authenticity, and historical importance. And because of that reputation, major museums frequently acquire works directly from the fair. Curators from institutions across the world attend TEFAF New York each year, searching for acquisitions, loans, and research opportunities. Another exciting aspect of the 2026 edition is the continued presence of younger galleries entering the fair alongside long-established dealers. While TEFAF is often associated with highly established galleries, organizers have increasingly introduced newer exhibitors presenting contemporary and interdisciplinary practices. TheArtNewspaper.com. That balance between historical expertise and contemporary experimentation gives the fair a much more dynamic energy. And unlike fairs dominated purely by speculation or trend cycles, TEFAF often feels grounded in long-term cultural value. The conversations happening here are not only about market momentum. They're also about preservation, scholarship, and historical significance. Another major focus this year is TEFAF's cultural partnerships and museum collaborations. The fair continues working closely with major institutions throughout New York City, including partnerships involving museum programming, collector events, and educational initiatives, TEFAF.com. And during TEFAF Week, many museums coordinate important exhibitions and events around the fair's presence in the city. Collectors move between the Armory, museum galas, private collection visits, gallery dinners, and institutional openings throughout Manhattan. The atmosphere feels extremely international. You have museum directors from Europe speaking with collectors from the Middle East, curators from Asia meeting dealers from New York, advisors, historians, artists, conservators, and patrons all moving through the same rooms. And because the fair attracts such a high-level audience, many important acquisitions and relationships begin quietly inside these conversations. Another exciting development surrounding TEFAF New York 2026 is the increased emphasis on design and collectible objects. Several exhibitors this year are presenting museum-caliber furniture, decorative arts, jewelry, ceramics, and 20th century design pieces that blur the line between fine art and functional object. Architecturaldigest.com. That crossover between art, design, architecture, and interiors continues becoming more prominent throughout the contemporary collecting world. Collectors today increasingly build collections that move fluidly between categories. Paintings coexist with furniture, sculpture with lighting, historical objects with contemporary installations. And TEFAF reflects that interdisciplinary approach beautifully. Another fascinating aspect of TEFAF is the atmosphere of patience inside the fair itself. Unlike some contemporary fairs where people rush quickly through booths trying to see everything, TEFAF encourages slower looking. Visitors spend time with objects. They study details. They ask questions. They engage deeply with materials and histories. And honestly, that slower rhythm feels refreshing. The fair reminds audiences that art can also be about contemplation rather than constant spectacle. Another major point of excitement this year involves several special installations and curated presentations happening throughout the Armory itself. TEFAF.com. These projects include site-specific installations, historical displays, and curated thematic presentations connecting different galleries and historical periods together. And because the Armory itself is such a visually dramatic building, these installations become part of the architecture in a very cinematic way. The relationship between space and object becomes incredibly important throughout the fair. There's also a noticeable increase this year in conversations surrounding sustainability, conservation, and the future of collecting. Several talks and panels throughout TEFAF Week address topics including cultural preservation, ethical collecting, conservation science, and the evolving role of private collectors within institutional ecosystems. Artforum.com. And that intellectual side of the fair is one of the reasons TEFAF continues holding such influence globally. It's not only a marketplace, it's also a meeting point for scholarship, research, preservation, and cultural dialogue. Another exciting aspect of the fair is the extraordinary range of materials visitors encounter. Ancient marble sculpture, rare manuscripts, contemporary paintings, photography, jewelry, furniture, ceramics, works on paper, bronze sculptures, textiles, minimalist design, Renaissance portrait, all existing together within the same environment. That diversity creates a completely different emotional experience compared to fairs focused exclusively on contemporary work. You become aware of artistic continuity across centuries. And honestly, TEFAF can completely change the way people think about collecting. The fair encourages audiences to look beyond categories and trends and instead think about quality, craftsmanship, historical resonance, and cultural significance. There's also something deeply New York about TEFAF's Upper East Side presence. The Park Avenue Armory, Museum Mile nearby, historic townhouses, private collections, auction houses, major galleries. The neighborhood itself reinforces the fair's atmosphere of history, collecting, and cultural legacy. And during TEFAF Week, the Upper East Side becomes one of the central meeting points of the international art world. TEFAF New York 2026 runs from May 15th through May 19th at the Park Avenue Armory in New York City, TEFAF.com. And for anyone interested in museum-quality art, historical dialogue, contemporary innovation, and one of the most intellectually ambitious fairs in the world, TEFAF New York continues to stand in a category entirely of its own.